I'm so nervous. Alright, hi. My name is Sapphire. Um, and I wanted to start a little podcast showing one of my favorite loves in this world, which is writing and reading. I'm gonna start this off first by letting you guys know what I'm reading right now. And then I'll kind of introduce the episode. So what I'm reading at the moment is Five Tuesdays in Winter. It's a collection of short stories. It's pretty good. And the story I want to share today with you all is called Protection. It's by Paola Peroni. And it's a lovely short story that you can find online and actually read for free. It's about this woman and her relationship with her grandmother. My relationship with my grandma is really really nice, and I love my grandma. She passed away a couple years ago, and I still miss her every day. All right. I took two classes that kind of inspired this episode. They were my creative writing class, where I had an assignment to write about a place that felt really like home to me and a place that I knew a lot about. And I chose to write about the town I was born in, River Falls, Wisconsin. It's a small town that I did not grow up in any way, but I was born in the hospital near there, and I have family who live there, including my aunt, who actually I visited last weekend, and my grandparents, who unfortunately are passed away. And so I talked about visiting my aunt in these short stories. I talked about going there with my boyfriend Talon, who whom I love, of course, and it was amazing to get to show him the place that I've been so many times before. I went there at least like once a year to visit family, and it was so nice to show him like a part of myself and a part of my childhood. And my grandma passed away before Talon ever got the chance to meet her. So it was also amazing because it was like he was seeing a part of her without ever actually having to meet her. And he doesn't know too much about her, but he knows I love her. So this episode is about grandmas specifically, I guess. And I'll just to kind of introduce you to what this podcast is going to be. I'm going to share a story I have read, a short snippet of a book I have loved, or in this case, a short story or a poem. And then I'll also show you never before seen, never before witnessed work that I actually wrote. And I'll also tell you any kind of like analytical stuff that I've picked up when reading it, to kind of tell you a little bit more about myself. So this is the first episode. Keep on saying, man, okay. I am currently studying at Arizona State University, about to get my major in film and media and television. And I studied a year at UCM theater, so I kind of have a background in theater, but it's mostly my media and film classes. One of my most recent classes is Women in Film and Culture, which I got the opportunity to watch so many different movies that some of them I hadn't seen before. And one of the assignments was to create a podcast. And then I kind of realized that I have all the stuff to make a podcast. So I figured why not do it with something I love, like sharing one of my favorite readings that I've done. And so that's what I'm doing. All right. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty. All right. Protection by Paola Peroni. An undercurrent of tension marked the days preceding Christmas. The doctor had warned us my grandmother might die any day, but she was determined to spend a last Christmas with her family, and to me that counted more than the doctor's words. I brought an armchair into her room and sat reading while she drifted in and out of sleep. People came and went, but I did not move. At times when we were alone, I caught her gaze. She said, "That brain of yours, does it help you stay out of trouble?" "It makes trouble interesting," I said. "That's what I feared," my grandmother said. I too feared trouble's appeal. I had just ended an affair with a man in Los Angeles whose sick wife I had befriended and tended to until she died. Dissecting my lack of shame and guilt was a distraction from the heartache of watching my dog die and the sole reason I had engaged with the couple. "Is anybody waiting for you back in New York?" she asked. I looked up from my book. "My job," I lied. I not only did not have a job, but was not looking for one, simply because I had no idea what to look for. "You don't give anybody a chance," she said. I said I give plenty of chances. "Stick with someone. It's the only way to find out if he's worth it," she said. I said maybe I'm not worth it. Maybe I am the problem. She said, "Is that what you're scared to find out?" "I'm scared of what I'm capable of." She said, "I'm glad to hear it. We should all be scared of what we are capable of." "I don't know what's wrong with me," I said. She said, "Nothing is wrong with you, and you're not so different as you like to think. Pass me the oxygen mask. You've used up my breath." When the nurse came to attend her, I stayed. I liked the nurse, and so did my grandmother. She was a big woman, and her sense of humor and ease in performing her duties made them less degrading, or so I hoped. That day she entered the room while I was collecting my books and removed my grandmother's dentures. In an effort not to show my unease and make my grandmother uncomfortable, I did not look away. But as I stood there, an incident in my childhood returned. I had been spending a few days at my grandmother's, and in the middle of the night I felt ill. I walked into her room, and with a movement of her hand she stopped me from moving forward. She did not prevent me, however, from catching a glimpse of her reaching for her dentures and putting them into her mouth. A woman of taste, she was careful not to elicit distaste from others. This was part of the reason she never discussed her father's suicide with anybody. Though everyone knew about it, she only spoke of it when I had ventured to ask her a few years before. "There is no end to what you want to know," she said. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to." "Nobody ever asked, and I never told my story. Maybe it was a mistake," she said, and I sensed relief mixed with reluctance. "I was very close to my father, but I knew nothing of his troubles. His death came as a shock. He did not leave a note, an explanation, not a word. All he left were debts, including those of my lavish wedding he had organized. He had been a prominent attorney, and she had grown up in luxury, but he had deserted his family rather than face financial ruin. Disappointment in the father she had loved was repugnant to her. "Did you have to pay the debts?" I asked. "Your grandfather's family had to intervene. They were gracious and generous and could afford to be, but it was no less humiliating," she said. The humiliation was exacerbated by her knowledge that her mother-in-law had not approved of the marriage, believing her a spoiled woman too frivolous for her son. My grandmother was determined to prove her wrong, and her father's suicide only strengthened her determination. I never asked for anything. I never pretended anything. I never complained. It took years, but my mother-in-law finally wrote me a letter apologizing for having misjudged me. "You have nothing to be ashamed of," I said. "I'm ashamed of my father," she said. After she died, I found among the correspondence she had carefully preserved letters from her husband, her children, her grandchildren, other members of the family, and friends, but nothing from her father. Even in her diaries there was no mention of him, but omissions reveal more than confessions. The unwavering effort to negate him never dispelled his prominence in her life. Love is grief. Love we have, love we lack, love we give, and love we miss. I remembered Antonio's son, the reserved boy with whom I had played in my childhood, now a married man with two children of his own, having to cope with his father's suicide while he assisted his mother in her recovery. But the gap between what we can imagine and what we can endure leaves room for surprises. I hoped the son of Antonio and Maria would amaze everyone, and himself above all. Maria's return to her senses was harder to envision. She might forsake sanity to survive. She might add the tragic topic to her litany of complaints. She might resort to silence to quench the shame. She might be unable to endure the pain and follow her husband, or find the will for a needed change. But the glare of the past would dim the future she had left to live. The day before Christmas Eve, I did not tell anyone where I was going. It was a chilly afternoon, and the city was all glitter and traffic. Antonio's funeral was being held in a neighborhood that was a peaceful village during the day, but lost all of its charm at night. When crowds flooded its streets in the desperate pursuit of amusement, the church was not overcrowded, and in the front row Antonio's son stood next to the casket. When the service was over, people gathered around him with downcast eyes, unable to face him. I recognized some of them, and we exchanged silent greetings. He saw me and came forward. He extended his hand, and I held it briefly in both of mine. "Any news about your mother?" I asked. "Last night the doctors declared her out of danger," he said. I didn't know what to wish for. I let go of his hand, but not of his gaze. I said, "My grandmother's father committed suicide." "Her father did not try to commit murder before he killed himself," he said. I said, "Her father had a very different reason. He had squandered all his money." "How is she doing?" he said. I said, "Determined to make it through Christmas." "I wish I had the same determination," he said. I set out to make my way home on foot and crossed the bridge. Glimmers of light over the surface of water, dimmed under an unrolling blanket of darkness. Streaks of pastel colors drained from the sky as if a painter had been rinsing his brush after a long day's work. The pale variations of pink, blurring the faded canvas over the eternal city, struck me at once with that familiar torpor I dreaded. To love Rome, I had to leave it. My grandmother was asleep when I returned. The nurse was resting in the adjacent room. I sat in my usual chair, but I could not read. "Where have you been?" she asked with her eyes closed. "To Antonio's funeral," I said. She opened her eyes. "Antonio Greco died?" I said, "Nobody wants you to know, and you should pretend you don't know." I told her what happened without leaving anything out. She was attentive, but age and exhaustion and dimmed shock and surprise. "You did the right thing," she said, and I was relieved to see that she did not need to be spared from the truth. My grandmother made it through Christmas. She got out of bed and sat on the wheelchair at the head of the table the way she always did. She had not cooked the meal, but had ordered it from a catering service. She tried a bit of everything and grimaced. It did not compare to her cooking. While I ate, I got my first taste of what Christmas without my grandmother would be like. The day before, my aunt had asked me to go buy a present from the family for my grandmother. I was incredulous. "We're exchanging presents?" "It's Christmas. We always exchange presents," said my aunt. "Grandmother is dying. She knows it. It's insulting to pretend it's just another Christmas," I said. "Keep quiet for once and do as you're told," said my aunt. "I don't want any part of this charade. Find somebody else to do it," I said and left. Despite my remonstrations, after dinner we proceeded to exchange presents, and my grandmother asked me to open hers. "I'm not in the mood for presents," I said. She said, "Neither am I." My younger cousin, an apprehensive woman, stepped forward and opened it for her. It was pretty negligee. It was put on her when she was dressed to be buried. I don't know who had gone shopping for it, but I am sure it was not bought with this in mind. The living have an uncanny proclivity to ignore death when faced with it. That line is really good. I'm gonna try to say it again because it's hitting hard line, but okay. The living have an uncanny. Oh my god, I can't talk. I cannot talk. Okay, one more time. The living have an uncanny proclivity to ignore death when faced with it. She glanced at her present and said, "I'm tired." I helped to put her back to bed, and it was then I saw the ordeal she had gone through to sit with us at the dinner table. When we were alone again, I leaned my forehead on the edge of her bed. "It's hard to stay put," she said without opening her eyes, "but even trouble gets tedious after a while." A few days later I received a call in the night and rushed to her apartment. The nurse was taking her pulse. My grandmother looked exhausted, and I knew she was ready to go. My aunt called the doctor, and when she arrived, the doctor instructed the nurse to add a palliative sedative to the IV. The nurse obeyed, yet it was not long before my grandmother revived and asked for a sip of coffee. Then her breathing got heavy again, and the agony that lasted 12 hours began. She was conscious to the very end, and to the end she squeezed my hand to let me know she knew I was there. I believe she wanted to reassure me, but I did not need reassurance. I needed it to be over. The pain she had to endure in those hours enraged me. The nurse had removed her dentures, and when I protested, she said at that point they were impediment to comfort. I waited to be alone in the room, and with my grandmother's collaboration, I eased the dentures back into her mouth. "Thank you," she whispered. My father and his sisters came in and out at brief intervals. I later learned they had been busy making funeral arrangements. I remained at my grandmother's side with my cousin. She could hear me, and I leaned over and said, "I want to find out what I'm worth." She winked at me. I would have to find out for myself. I knew my grandmother's religious beliefs were a comfort to her, and I knew she had wished I had them too. To her dismay, I had rejected the church, but it was my friend, a young Jesuit, who came to give her the extreme unction. "This is the greatest gift," my grandmother said, taking my hand. That I was the one to have delivered it was unexpected and maybe promising to her. As I watched her dying, the only idea of paradise that came to mind was the one I heard a friend describe as that place where we do not hurt the ones we love. It was night when my grandmother left us. Nobody can protect us. All right. Thank you so much for joining me on that lovely story. I'm going to share with you guys my thoughts when I read this story initially and kind of what it makes me think of now. And then I'll kind of introduce my piece that relates to this lovely work of art. I will say none of my pieces are quite as amazing as any of the stuff I read, but it's what I aspire to be like. So, honesty is a big part of this story because the narrator is honest to her grandmother. Like, at every point, that she tells her that Antonio died. They also they criticize each other, but they're so honest about it, and they have so much respect and love for each other. And the fact that her daughter, her sorry, her great the fact that her granddaughter refuses to pretend that this is a regular Christmas shows how much respect she has for her grandma because everything's not okay right now. The granddaughter is obviously distraught. She's losing one of the closest people to her, and she's losing the only person in her family that she feels like truly understands her. They do a good job of accepting themselves and everything. They're really good at accepting each other. Their relationship is so interesting. A lot of this theme in the story, and if you read the full story, which I will try to link to you guys, you're able to see how much of the story is deals with this idea of protection. And of course, the ending line, nobody can protect us, shows about how you start this world, you start it alone, completely alone, and you leave the world alone. And you have people around you who make you feel safe. And to the narrator, the person who made her feel the safest, her grandmother, has now passed away. So it's this extreme loss that just pushes the story forward because it's also a universal loss. Like everyone at some point will lose someone close to them, and I can't fathom how hard it's gonna be. Like I already lost my grandma, but the idea of losing more of my family or people close to me is so heartbreaking and so tough to go through. And it's just this universal experience. And I'm going to go up to the line that's highlighted that talks about loss too, because it's like it's something that you can never truly get over. Grief is something that you can never, never get rid of. Love is grief. Love we have, love we lack, love we give, and love we miss. And it also kind of reminds me of the WandaVision show, if anyone saw the WandaVision show, because it has that line, which I might misquote because I don't have it pulled up, but grief is not, grief is just like love persevering, which I think is just so meaningful and goes, it aligns with this quote really well because grief is truly all the love you have for that person. And now you can't tell them anymore, and now they're not here, and now it's just in you for the rest of your life. So love is grief. Love we have, love we lack, love we give, and love we miss. Love we miss is, of course, like the loved ones who have unfortunately passed on. Love we lack is what I would assume love that you give to someone that isn't always like reciprocated, whether that be someone you're wanting to date, or I've also seen it with like parents or even grandparents where kids just have such unconditional love for their parents. And not all the time is it given back in the same way. All right. So I'm gonna move on. All right. My dog has joined me at the microphone. She was feeling a little left out, so I'm sorry if you hear her. Bella, do you have anything to add? Oh, oh, too close to the mic. I apologize. All right. Also, sorry, I was trying to take a little break to find the next thing that I'm reading. I just remembered I have this cute little duck who is reading a book. And, excuse me, Bella. All right. I just wanted to add that this duck reading a book is reading along with us right now. All right. So, the story that I want to share with you, I wrote in my creative writing class earlier this year. And it was creative writing, but it was nonfiction creative writing. So think kind of memoirs. And this one was my personal essay. It was about my trip to River Falls. I kind of talked about it earlier in the episode when we started. And I think I give enough, sorry, I think I give enough context in the story for all you really need to know. And it's about my grandmother. And it is not as long as protection. Just to let you guys know. I'm now 15. I have my first boyfriend. I am constantly on my phone texting him while on the trip. I feel like an outsider to my family at times, often quiet, often listening to music. But there's one person that has always made me belong, and that's my grandma. I have fond memories to her and was constantly told I looked just like her when she was younger, with bright blonde hair and freckles all over my face. The thing that stands out the most to me is our shared blue eyes. We ha- sorry, we have them, and so does my dad. After Grandma got more and more sick, I tried to help her the best I could. We always sat next to one another, and we were always on each other's teams during family games. Grandma was a collector, too. Collected stuffed bears and dolphins. Her whole bathroom was covered in them. My grandma also struggled with diabetes, among other things. I just remember sitting on her faded blue chair with her, and she would ask me to get up and pass her some snacks. It really mattered what. The last birthday I celebrated with her was a big one. She was turning 70. I was quiet and anxious throughout the whole party, but sat next to my grandma. My extended family visited too to celebrate the big occasion. My aunt's daycare still has the same preschool decor, but with some streamers screaming 70. As gifts are passed to my grandma, she is slowly unpacking each one, sometimes needing help to finish. She is smaller than she has ever been. I notice when I hug her there's less cushioning, more bone. My grandma, without trying, has lost weight. 2 weeks later, she passed away in her sleep. I miss my grandma very dearly, and I love all of my family, but it's just so crazy how we as a culture see weight loss as such a positive thing when in many ways it can be negative. And my grandma was never she was always bigger, but she was never, I don't know, it was just insane the amount of weight that she had lost at the end of her life than what she had. And there's a difference between healthy weight and unhealthy weight. And I think it's hard to differentiate when we live in a society who just rewards healthy weight or rewards their idea of healthy, whether it is really healthy. And it's something I struggle with a lot personally too, but sorry, not to get on that tangent. Um, yeah. Point is, I love my grandma very much. Miss her every day. And I wanted to share a somewhat sad story about her, I guess, and about how I remember her last few moments and how I remember growing up with her. And I just think it's very true that you never stop grieving and you never stop missing those you've lost. And they're always with you and they're always in your heart. And it's very hard to go on when you feel like no matter what you do, you're all gonna die one day. Yeah, that's a little sad. What a sad first episode. But yeah, but it's not. I guess the point of it. Yes, we're not protected. Yes, we are all gonna inevitably die. But the impact that people who are gone have on your life reaches so much farther than how long their lifespan is. Like my aunt owns a daycare and she's worked like been the sole person in that daycare for 25 years. And she's affected so many lives throughout her career too. And my mom too works with kids and it's just that's just one example of a lasting impact your life can have. Even though even if you won't live forever. Teachers are great too. But yeah, my writing's too well, so I don't know if this episode will see the light of day. But at least I recorded it, and I'll get another one up and running too. Alright, thank you if you bothered listening. I started this podcast to just share some of the reading I've done and some of the writing I've done, because those are two of my favorite things to do. So I appreciate it so much if you're listening and if you care. And I'm planning to get an episode out every Thursday for the rest of the year as a commitment to myself. So if anyone bothers to listen, I appreciate it. Thank you. And I will see you next Thursday, whenever that may be, if this episode ever sees the light of day. Um, yeah. Have the loveliest of days. Have a lovely, lovely day. Whoop whoop.